Hey everybody, Barry here from the Brewed Palate. I'm here at Bitter and Esters, my go-to homebrew shop here in Brooklyn on Washington Avenue with the one and only Charlie Papazian, who's known for bringing homebrewing basically to the world, but specifically America. So I'll take this opportunity to welcome you to New York City, and what's it like for you visiting the city and getting a picture of our craft beer and homebrewing scene?
Well, it's exciting times for New York City and the area. This area, things are starting to get to be a critical mass, and people are, the thing about home brewing is that you share and you turn other people on to your tasting your beer, and then they're interested in it, and it's getting to a point where you don't have to go great distances to find good beer. Right. It starts at home in this case, what we're talking about. But
I mean, one thing that I wanted to start off with before we get about your two new books, or the two new editions of your books, is that in America we've become very lucky. Like, we have availability of tons of ingredients, tons of information. It's like there's no limits to what we can brew now. But I know that in New York City, sometimes it's something we pride ourselves on, is being able to take our small apartments and still brew all grain beer, and really adapt to our constraints. So what do you who has gotten a picture of the whole country in its own, what do you think characterizes the American homebrewer nowadays?
Well, I think my two books that have just come out, the Complete Joy Homebrewing, 4th edition, and the 2nd edition of the Homebrewer's Companion, the way I put my energy into writing those books and revising them, kind of keeping them up to date, the whole concept of making it enjoyable, no matter what scale you're brewing on, whether it's 1-gallon batches or 30-gallon batches, and people can take it in any direction. But the way I present the information, I use 5 gallons as an example, but it's just as an example, and all the fundamentals of what beer and brewing is all about, understanding the process, the ingredients, the moving beer from one place to another during the process, fermentation, hops, malt, syrups, honey, sugar, you name it, barrels, kegs, bottles. If you understand the basic underlying principles of home brewing and brewing, you can approach it with whatever's the situation you're in, whether you're in a small apartment in New York City metro area, or you have a spare barn and you're in the back 40. You can take it to whatever level. You can start at a small scale and make great beer. You can start at a scale and make great beer.
I'm sure you know that, like, nowadays the current growth, or the growth of American craft beer, since you helped it grow, is now American craft beer serves as a kind of a role model to the international scene. And each little country and region, even countries like Belgium and Germany, who have had traditions, are now looking to us for examples of how to revamp their beer, bring more variety to it. So how do you see, like, American homebrewing really also influencing other countries?
Well, American style of home brewing has really made a big difference throughout the world. The image and the hobby of home brewing before Americans got really involved was how to make the cheapest beer you could possibly make. It didn't matter about quality, it was a matter of the alcohol, even in the Prohibition days. But Americans, if they were going to make beer, they wanted something that they'd buy. As good as better than they could buy, or as good as they can buy. And back in the 70s when I started, it was pretty much anything you made was better than different and better than you could buy, because it was pretty much all light lager. But now you got craft beer everywhere, and a lot of those craft brewers were inspired by small home brewers, and I see that in the rest of the world too, where there's a real strong home brewing community. I can see things in Argentina, Chile, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, they have really some pretty good home brewing communities, and they're at an advantage because you got this base of people who know beer and are understanding of what craft beer is. So the educational learning curve for the general population is going to progress a lot more quickly. And this is what happened in this country. You know, home brewers were the vanguard, were the pioneers. They were the craft brewers, the professional small craft brewers' first customers. And you know, at the American Home Brewers Association, which I founded in 1978 out of the idea of teaching beer classes and putting together a network and community of people. Our offices are in the same building as, you know, the professional small brewers. So there's a lot of collaboration going, and that's the model that just happens to work really well in this country. And like you said, you know, Belgium, Germany, I mean, they're discovering American style IPAs, for example, and making sour beers that only the Belgians could lay claim to making sour beers not too long ago, and now Americans kind of have reinvented and recreated different other directions in making those kinds of beers. So home brewers they're the pioneers that are the foundation of everything that's happening.
Right, and with your role as like almost a homebrewing icon, I want to like bring back something that John Palmer told me when he was back here in May, was that at one point when he first came out with How to Brew, the Brewers Association and the American Home Brewers Association kind of tracked their progress or the practice of homebrewing by how his book was, you know, being accepted and kind of teaching a lot of people how to brew. But you were the first one to really write a book about home brewing that was, you know, available to the masses, and you're on their 4th edition. So like how do you see like the popularity or the acceptance of your book, you know, being an aid to the growth of homebrewing, you know, since you started?
Yeah, well, it says right on the cover, I've been tracking the sales for all these years in a spreadsheet. So 1.3 million copies thereabouts have been sold of that book.
Congratulations.
That's a lot of home brewers. And, you know, that book gets shared. And I don't know, I put an extra page, the first page of the book, there's a warning. I don't know if you've read it yet. It says, warning. This book, if loaned, may never return. It may never be returned, and that's the you know, people loan out their books. So you know, there's a lot more than 1.3 million people that have been introduced to my book because it gets recycled. But yeah, you know, the premise of my book is not just how to make beer. How to homebrew is, you know, how to enjoy it and have fun with it. You know, one of the things that this is kind of a little digression here, but one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday was, before my book came out, and before I was teaching homebrewing classes, if you looked at the old homebrew books before my book came out, and particularly the British books, most of the beer recipes were Irish stout, English porter. Here's a recipe for pale ale. Here's a recipe for a German Pilsner. And then my book came out, and I have a recipe for Toad Spit Stout, or Ghost Scrotum Ale, or Rocky Raccoon's Honey Lager. And you look at the beer culture now, at all the small brewers and the names that they give their beers. And before my book came out, you know, I just realized this recently, you know, maybe I had a little bit of something to do with getting creative with naming their beer and actually instilling a little bit of fun into not only the hobby but the beer world.
One question I had for you that's been on my mind for actually a while, and I've asked this to some of my fellow craft beer enthusiasts, is that, in my opinion, every craft beer enthusiast should homebrew, whether it's, you know, brewing once or twice just to get an appreciation for really what it takes to go from, you know, raw ingredients to the final product. But I feel that from my experiences, ever since I started homebrewing 5 years ago, it's really taken my love for craft beer and taken it to a whole new level. So, like, in your opinion, you know, should every craft beer enthusiast homebrew, or is it something that you could kind of observe, you know, at some point, or do you have to actually hands-on do it?
Well, you know, everybody has their priorities, and if beer is a priority, and there's no, I think you're onto something, because there's no doubt in my mind that if you're a craft beer lover, you enjoy beer, learning a little bit by doing. In other words, make a batch of homebrew or 2 or 3, just to kind of understand, you know, where your beer came from. It's like a little bit, you know, if you have a garden. If you have a garden and you grow some of your own food, you have a much more appreciation of what you buy, and especially compared to what you grow, your own. And the hand of God has just come in with a rye IPA. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. So would I recommend it? Sure, if you have time. You know, it takes, you know, my books are about, each book, the Homebrewers, the Joy of Home, Complete Joy of Home Brewing, and the Homebrewers Companion, is about 450 pages each. A little bit intimidating. That's why relax, don't worry, I have a homebrew. You know, if you've never brewed before, you read the first 36 pages, and you can make a beer every bit as good as this rye IPA or any other good craft beer just by reading the first 36 pages. Maybe you won't have all the finesse of what you would be doing if you brewed 5 or 6 times, but that's true of anything that you do, you know. You get into it, and, you know, being able to appreciate, you know, what you're actually tasting, the love and, you know, the creativity that goes into some of these special beers. You have an underlying appreciation that really adds to your enjoyment of beer. Whatever beer you're making. It doesn't even have to be a craft beer. I mean, it could be a Pilsner Light Lager.
I think your slogan is a good way to segue into the books, right? Or especially the new Complete Joy of Homebrewing. I really like how it's structured, how it starts at the beginner and then it moves on and on, gives more detailed and, you know, advanced information as it goes on. Because, you know, for me, you know, I've been brewing for a while, so some of it, even it's always good to start off with like a refresher of the basics and then move on. But when it comes to relax, don't worry, have a homebrew, you know, today I find that with the wealth of information out there, you know, every homebrewers of all levels are like, want to jump to like the really advanced stuff from the beginning, but, you know, you put the slogan in your book from the beginning to make sure that people, you know, take it slow, brew it, you know, an extract batch, you know, you don't need to, you know, go crazy at first. So, you know, what piece of advice would you give to, you know, to homebrewers, you know, to make sure they stay relaxed? Because as you know, with such a small margin of error when it comes to brewing, you know, and sanitization and everything, it's very easy to get really nervous.
It is, you know, it's intimidating if you've never done it before. Just like anything new, you know, if somebody said, all right, you're going to make pie today, and you've never made a pie before, you know, oh my God, I've heard about how difficult it is to make crust. Oh man, I have to core and slice an apple. I've never done that before. I can't do that, but relax, you can do it. You just got to know the fundamentals, which I go through in my book, and I like you say, the Complete Joy of Home Brewing emphasizes malt extract brewing a bit more than the Homebrewers Companion, which is his master's edition,
right.
The second volume, a continuation of the Complete Joy of Home Brewing.
Right.
And then more all grain, gets more involved in the equipment and explains more about what's going on with hops and mashing. But it's all the fundamentals are all in the Complete Joy of Home Brewing. And you know, when the new edition came out, and I kind of posted that it's coming out, and I posted on my Facebook page, I got a few comments from people I've known for many, many years, and it was interesting to see. Some people said, you know, I read your book 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I decided to get the new edition and just reread it from the beginning, and it was like deja vu and taking them back to the spirit in which they started reading those same words again, and revised words obviously here and there, but kind of taking them back into time where they began again and renewed and refreshed their attitude. And the guy said, you know, I'm even more inspired to start brewing even more now than I was before the fourth edition came out. So, you know, getting back to fundamentals and understanding the process is really the basis of really enjoying the hobby.
And as you said, there's a lot of new things in these books, you know, in terms of more things about beer styles, you know, different hops. You have like a huge chart in there, and of course, you know, in the Homebrewers Companion it gets more detail. But, you know, can you just talk a little bit about the process that you went on revising, you know, an already great resource?
Yeah, it was a pretty much. It was a 2.5, 3 years ago when the process started, and I decided I wanted to revise both books because the Homebrewers Companion was written basically in '92, was published in '94, so it's 20 years since that book was published, and I've learned a lot since then. And the Complete Joy of Homebrewing, every 10 to 12, 13 years it needs some revision, and you know, I remember writing new books from scratch, and doing revisions is every bit as time intensive as writing from scratch. So my underlying principle was, don't screw up a good thing. Don't change the fun aspect and the basic premise of the book just because you know a lot more stuff. You don't have to necessarily force it on people. I basically reread every word, every paragraph, made sure it was clear. I got notes and suggestions from people through the years about questions about this and that, and I just clarified those sections to make it even more clear. Obviously update the charts, the beer styles, take out recipes that I don't hear too much about or I'm not really that pleased with, as much as the new recipes that I've developed over the last 12, 13, 14 years, because I still brew, you know, 10 to 15 times a year. And, you know, besides brewing my favorite recipes, I force myself to try new things, new directions, and I include those in both of those books to kind of really represent the wider breadth of what people are into these.
Right, so, you know, talking about your recipes, you know, one of my favorite things to do is write a new recipe, whether I'm going to brew it in a week or in a few months. You know, but I love going on Beersmith and just creating new recipes, you know, looking online for inspiration, stuff like that. But, you know, in both of your books, new books, you have a lot of them really cool, creative recipes. And even I want to start trying some. So, you know, when you know, sit down and you actually have time to brew, you know, how do you formulate a recipe?
There's several different approaches, and it's reflective of the kinds of beers I make. I travel a lot, and I taste beers that home brewers make that I've never made myself. I go to countries like Germany and enjoy German-style Helles and beer gardens, or I'll go to Belgium or England and I'll try some great beers from different breweries. And those experiences, not only the beer, but the experiences with friends are so memorable that I'd want to create that beer to remind me of those experiences. You know, there's a brew pub in Prague called Ufleku. They make a brown lager, dark lager. They've been making that thing for over 400 years. They're the oldest brew pub in the world. And I love that beer and the ambience so much, I wanted to make that beer. I want to make it to remind me of the good times I've had. So I'll design a recipe, and I can't use the same brewing process as they do, and the same yeast they do. But I fool around with the yeasts and the malt and the fermentation temperatures and yeast to kind of zero in on the flavors that I recall. And so so that's one approach. And then I'll get new malts and new hops from the people that supply hops and malts or new yeast, and I want to try them and try them in different ways. I really like to kind of goose the system, you know, like the recipe that I wrote for Bitter and Esters, the brown ale. I was asked to put together a special recipe for the shop, and I said, well, they wanted a brown ale, hoppy brown ale, American brown ale. I said, well, if I made a brown ale, what would I do? I thought to myself, I want to make it different. I wouldn't want to make just a brown ale. So basically, it's a brown ale with a few different specialty malts in to make it the aromatic aroma of malt that I like, and the honey character of malt that I like, and also using some dry hopping of hops that most people don't think of putting into an American style brown ale. Some hops from New Zealand and here in the US that are relatively new, that give some real unusual tropical fruity characters to an American brown ale, which is typically, you know, your Cascade, Centennial, American citrus character.
Right.
I want to do something different to turn people on to new directions, and that's what I do in my book too. Like you said, that interesting, creative, you know, get people thinking about new directions. And you know, most people use my recipes. Some of them just use my recipes exactly as they are, and as I would hope that they use my recipes as a basis of where they want to go.
Right.
They'll take one ingredient out and substitute another ingredient.
Right.
That's what homebrewing is all about.
That's what I usually do. So, but I feel like one last topic that I want to discuss is, you know, especially related to your slogan, is that a lot of it, you know, I've found that over time a lot of homebrewing is about mastering your process more than getting into those nitty-gritty details of all like the information, that all the little things that people are getting into now. You know, with John Palmer's water book, everyone's getting into water chemistry. I find that's important, but you know, how do you feel about, you know, the importance of really mastering your process and your equipment before you start trying all like the more, you know, fine-tuning biological aspects of yeast and water?
Oh, there's different aspects of fine-tuning. I can get really, like, I tried, and I talk about this in my book, put things in perspective. You're making beer at 5-gallon batches, and whether you get 75% or 80% extraction rate from your grains, don't stress about it. Relax, don't worry, because it's only costing you 50 cents more for the grain to kind of get the yield that you want to. Now, if you were a professional brewer making millions of barrels, that 3% difference adds to millions of dollars.
Right.
But you're 5 gallons. And also, you know, getting so exact with hop bitterness units and boil time and getting it, thinking you're getting it just right. There's so many variables about what you get out of hops, whether it's the fermentation temperature, whether it's the yeast you use, whether you lose some in the trube, you know, getting geeky here, but you know, there's so many other variables that will make a 5 to 10% difference in your final result, that trying to eke out another 3% or getting down to the, you know, first decimal point in accuracy, it's lost at the scale we're brewing 5 to 10 gallons of beer. So, you know, master the process of getting comfortable with brewing and enjoying the process, and not that it becomes routine, but you're comfortable, and when you get comfortable you can start getting creative. It's like, you know, when you allow yourself to take vacation time from, you know, working your ass off all the time, you have time to get creative. And when you get comfortable and master your system, master your process and your system, you get comfortable in taking time to get creative. So I'm all for that.
All right, well, I think that, you know, sums up a lot about what books, you know, what your philosophy is about. So now that, you know, your new books are out, just to conclude, like, how do you, you know, what final piece of advice can you give to homebrewers who buy your book and are looking to, you know, take the next step and get a little more, you know, into the hobby, you know, once they get comfortable?
Well, you know, take your time, relax, don't want to have a homebrew, of course, you know that. You know, spend some time learning the fundamentals, and you know, I take you through the steps in my books, particularly in the companion. There's a lot of fundamental stuff. I don't, you know, you don't have to learn about every gasket and every widget and every pump, and you know, you don't have to get into 15-gallon. Keep it fun. You don't have to get into 50. You don't have to get 15-gallon systems just to be a better brewer. I find that, and most homebrewers will agree, if you get a bigger system and more sophisticated, you brew less. Because when you brew at 5 gallons, you brew more, and you get to create different beers, and that's what I do. I still make 5 gallons at a time because, yeah, when it's over, it's over. It's time to brew another batch, and I've worked it out in my life out so that I still enjoy making beer, getting up early in the morning. I get it down to an all grain process. Down, I can mash in at 7 a.m. and have it cleaned up and thoroughly finished by 11:30. So 4.5 hours, and if it takes longer than that, yeah, you might have to spend some time cleaning your pumps and your fancy equipment.
I want to thank you, Charlie, for coming to New York. I know you have a very busy schedule now that you're promoting your new book, which only came out a little while ago. So I guess I'll wish you good luck in spreading the word of your book, and of course continuing on your mission to make homebrewing more accessible to people all over the world.
Cheers.